The imperial hall of Averron rose like a black mountain at the heart of the capital world, a monolith carved from the fused bones of extinct titans and reinforced with obsidian quarried from planets the Empire had long since consumed. The hall's ceiling stretched beyond the curvature of sight, its vaulted expanse pierced by rivers of starlight channeled through conduits of crystal. Each of these conduits held a captured star, suspended mid-detonation, eternally frozen in the moment of its death. Their glow painted the hall in a slow pulse, heartbeat like ancient, heavy. On every pillar, etched from polished voidstone, were the victories of the Averron Imperium, depictions of 1,000 worlds conquered, 10,000 species bent to submission. The patterns danced when you walked past them, shimmering with holographic retellings of battles won before humanity had even discovered fire. The hall was a monument to triumph and a warning to any who dared imagine defiance. In the exact center of this cosmic sanctum sat Emperor Exural the Infinite. He reclined upon a throne forged from the crystallized heart of a collapsed neutron star, a singular object that radiated such dense gravity that it warped the air around it. Only the Emperor's own formidable biology, enhanced through millennia of engineered evolution, allowed him to sit upon it without being crushed into a smear of atoms. Even so, he sat with casual ease, draped in a mantle of shimmering war silk woven from the threads of an extinct plasma beast. The garment glowed softly like embers under his 4 golden eyes, each capable of perceiving entire spectrums of reality most species didn't even have names for. The Emperor's presence filled the hall as much as the throne did. To the ordinary Averron citizen, he was a god. To his generals, he was inevitability made flesh. To the galaxy beyond imperial borders, he was a storm wearing a crown. Before him now, on the polished floor of obsidian and starlight, knelt 3 envoys from the frontier world's small, quivering creatures with membranes around their eyes to shield them from the oppressive radiance of the hall. Their limbs trembled with the effort of simply existing under the Emperor's gaze. One of them attempted to speak, but his throat constricted with fear. Another elbowed him sharply with a shaking limb. The third, perhaps the bravest or the most resigned, managed a whisper. "Your Radiance humans have crossed the border." For a long, echoing moment, the hall remained silent. Even the beating of the suspended stars seemed to slow, as if waiting. Then the Emperor smirked. It was a small expression, but on Exural's face it carried the weight of continents, the quiet assurance of a being who had witnessed supernova collapse at his command. His smirk was the kind that turned lesser species into dust. "Humans," he repeated, the word dripping with amusement. "The feral primates? The bone throwers from the water rock?" The envoys nodded, though their fear made it a trembling, jerking motion. Sirrah leaned back, resting 2 of his massive hands on the arms of his throne, while the other 2 brushed idly at the air. His voice rolled through the chamber with a deep resonance that made the pillars vibrate. "I was told they learned to split atoms, that they constructed ships using metals so crude they barely qualify as materials." His smirk widened. "And now you tell me they cross my borders, as though they understand the enormity of where they tread." One envoy swallowed hard. "They destroyed an outpost, your Radiance." The Emperor laughed. The sound echoed off every wall, a thunderous, rolling cadence that made the star conduits flicker with sympathetic vibration. "An outpost. You come to me with this trembling panic over one single outpost." "It was not ordinary," another envoy stammered. "The human weapons are toys," Cyril interrupted sharply, waving a dismissive hand. They have clawed their way to the stars with scraps and stubbornness. They are loud, yes. They are stubborn. They are inventive. He chuckled. A curious species. Entertaining even, but dangerous, preposterous. He rose from the throne, all four eyes blazing with regal superiority. My fleets have crushed empires older than time. My war engines have turned star systems into monuments of ash. Humans cannot bring anything I have not already mastered 1,000 times over. The envoys exchanged fearful glances, but none dared speak. Xuril strode down from his throne, the gravity-warping floor bending under the weight of his steps. He stood before the envoys, towering over them like a living mountain. His shadow alone seemed heavy enough to press them into the ground. "You tremble," he said, voice low, "because you believe these humans are different." He leaned closer. "They are not." The envoys lowered their heads to the floor. The Emperor straightened again, his mantle flaring behind him like the wings of a solar dragon. He turned his gaze toward the distant horizon, seen through the open archways of the hall. There, beyond the great expanse of the capital city, he could see the Empire's fleet gliding through the upper atmosphere, thousands of ships, each capable of sterilizing planets. "Send word to the High Marshal," he ordered. "Gather the 7th and 9th fleets. Dispatch them to the border. I grow weary of these human dramatics." He waved a hand, already dismissing the matter. "By the time I take my next meal, their incursion will be a memory." The envoys backed away, bowing so deeply their foreheads scraped the polished floor. And as they retreated, Xuril returned to his throne, the smirk still etched across his imposing features. He rested his chin on one hand, tapping his taloned finger lazily as if contemplating what meal he might enjoy after this trivial matter was resolved. "Humans," he murmured with amusement. It was at that precise moment, at the very height of his arrogance, that the hall trembled. It was subtle at first, a vibration, no stronger than the whisper of a breeze, but it grew quickly, resonating through every star conduit, every pillar, every atom of the chamber. The air shivered, the light warped, the gravity around the throne fluctuated. Xuril's smirk faded. A second tremor struck stronger, more violent. The banners swayed. Dust fell from the ancient rafters. The palace's inner defenses flickered as if something had brushed against them. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. "What," he said slowly, dangerously, "was that?" For the first time in centuries, silence answered him, not the serene silence of a peaceful empire, but the terrified silence of the unknown pressing against reality itself. The alarms began to wail. The alarms that blared through the Imperial Hall had not been heard in 10,000 years. They were deep, resonant, and discordant tones engineered not merely to warn, but to terrify. Even the battle-hardened veterans who stood guard along the hall's rim stiffened at their stations as crimson glyphs pulsed across the vaulted ceiling. Emperor Xuril stood perfectly still, though the mantle across his broad frame shifted like a living shadow. His four eyes, forged to witness the fury of collapsing stars, scanned the hall with rising fury. The second tremor hit. This one was not subtle. It tore through the obsidian floor like a rippling shockwave, and several envoys stumbled, falling to the ground with panicked cries. Star conduits flickered violently. The suspended, frozen stars inside them pulsed as if straining against the crystallized prisons in which they had been trapped for millennia. A high-ranking officer burst into the hall, breathless and wild-eyed, armor plates rattling. "Your Radiance," he cried, dropping to one knee so quickly he nearly skidded across the polished surface. "We are under attack." Cyril's voice was calm, but filled with the promise of violence. "Explain, now." "The defense grid." The officer hesitated. That alone was blasphemy. No one hesitated before the Emperor. "What of the grid?" Cyril demanded. "Your radiance, it has been compromised." The Emperor's pupils contracted into razor-thin lines. "Compromised," he repeated. "You mean damaged?" "No, sire." The officer swallowed, overridden. The hall erupted with gasps and horrified whispers. Even the guards exchanged rigid glances, their hands clenching against their weapons. Cyril's expression darkened. "That is impossible. Only the Imperial Code, my code, can access the grid." "We detected an intrusion of unknown origin," the officer said, voice trembling despite his efforts. "At first, we believed it a system glitch. Then the failsafe protocols initiated unprompted. The grid attempted to isolate the breach. And the breach overpowered it. A silence fell so absolute, it felt like the universe itself had paused. "Impossible," the Emperor said, though the word felt increasingly hollow. "Nothing overrides the grid." Another tremor shook the hall, this one accompanied by a sound like thunder being dragged backwards through time. The air shimmered. The columns vibrated. A low, bone-deep hum filled the space. And then another officer rushed in, this one pale, trembling so violently his armor buzzed. "Your radiance. There is something descending into the palace airspace." Cyril stalked toward the great archway at the front of the hall. With a sweeping gesture, he commanded the arch to open. Massive slabs of voidstone shifted aside, revealing the sprawling capital city below. Averron Prime was a world of towering spires and floating citadels, a planet whose sky was constantly filled with the shimmering wings of warships and the glow of orbital cannons. It was said to be impregnable, untouchable, a fortress world wrapped in layers of defenses that made entire fleets tremble. But now, the sky above the city cracked. Not figuratively, not metaphorically, literally. A fracture split open in the upper atmosphere, as though someone were peeling back the layers of reality like fragile paper. Electricity rippled outward in concentric rings. Storm clouds formed instantly around the anomaly, spiraling inward as if drawn by a cosmic whirlpool. And from within that rift, something emerged. The ship descended slowly, dipping through the breach with a grace that defied logic. It was sleek, not like the angular warships of Averron, but shaped with smooth lines and gentle curves, almost organic. A hull of shifting metal that shimmered with impossible colors. Its surface bent light, swallowed it, refracted it into patterns that seemed to whisper. Cyril's second heart skipped a beat. He had seen ships from every corner of the galaxy, crystalline vessels grown from sentient star corals, titanic forge ships built inside black holes, living, breathing constructs piloted by hive minds. But nothing like this. "What is that thing?" a general whispered. No one answered. The ship dipped lower, gliding through the thick gravitational mesh that enveloped the capital. The mesh did not resist. It did not flare. It simply parted around the unknown vessel, as though welcoming it. That was impossible. The gravitational mesh recognized no authority except that of the Emperor himself. Foreign ships should have been crushed like insects attempting to penetrate it. But this thing passed through effortlessly. Cyril's jaw tightened. "Scan it." "We cannot," an officer said. Our sensors won't lock onto it. The readings are. He checked his pad again, blinking in disbelief. They're folding in on themselves. The Emperor whipped around. Speak clearly. Sire, our instruments are reporting contradictory data. The ship is made of known metals, unknown metals, pure energy, and non-matter simultaneously. That is absurd. Agreed, Your Radiance, the officer whispered. The ship continued its serene descent until it hovered directly above the palace grounds. Its engines made no sound, yet every being on the planet could feel something, a pressure, a presence, like the air itself had begun to think. It's broadcasting something, another technician gasped. An identification signature. Cyril straightened. Finally, a clue. What species lays claim to this vessel? He ordered. The technician swallowed and read the answer with numbed disbelief. Humans, Your Radiance. A cold dread spread through the hall, crawling up the pillars, sinking into the bones of everyone present. The Emperor felt the weight of it too, but unlike his subordinates, he crushed the feeling beneath his will. Impossible, he declared once more, though the conviction was slipping. Humans could not build this. A slow, rhythmic pulse emanated from the ship. 3 beats, then silence, then 3 beats again. It was not a weapon discharge. It was intentional. A signal. A greeting. Your Radiance, whispered the first officer. It is requesting docking clearance. Decline, Exeral thundered. But the ship did not wait for permission. Panels along its underside shifted, reconfiguring with a fluid motion that made even the Emperor's hardened nerves twitch. Pieces of the hull unfurled like petals of a mechanical flower, revealing a platform. No, a ramp that extended toward the palace balcony. The ramp stopped exactly level with the hull's entrance. No thrusters. No stabilizers. Perfect precision. The Emperor stared, all 4 eyes narrowing. Prepare the palace defenses, he snapped. Activate the null barrier. Ready plasma projectors, 1 through. He stopped. His breath caught. The null barrier, the most powerful defensive field in the Empire, did not activate. The control console flickered, flashed, then went dark. Sire, an engineer cried. The barrier isn't responding. The Emperor snarled. Override it manually. We can't. Something is blocking the commands. By what? Unknown signal interference. The engineer swallowed. It's coming from that ship. The hull vibrated again, not from force, but from anticipation. Something was moving inside the vessel. A figure. No, 3 figures. They appeared silhouetted at the top of the ramp before stepping into the light of the hall. Their forms were unmistakable. They were human. They moved with deliberate calmness, stepping onto the ramp that led directly into the Emperor's domain. The first was tall, carrying a weapon that hummed with barely restrained fury. The second wore a suit that shifted like living metal, flowing along the contours of their body. But it was the third one, the one without armor, without weapons, who walked in front. Hands clasped calmly behind his back, like he had just arrived for a casual conversation. Cyril's lower arms tightened into fists. His mantle flared with threat. Guards, he commanded. Lock onto them. Prepare to fire on my command. The guards raised their weapons, plasma lances glowing with enough energy to collapse mountains. The 3 humans continued walking. Unhurried, unfazed, unimpressed. Cyril's smirk did not return. There was no humor left in this situation, only an emerging, unfamiliar feeling crawling up his spine. a feeling he had not experienced since he was young, something he would never admit, not even to himself. Dread. The three humans continued their steady approach, each footstep utterly silent against the polished obsidian floor of the Imperial Hall. The ramp retracted behind them like a folding ripple in reality, sealing the vessel without a single mechanical sound. Three small silhouettes walked through the light of suspended dying stars, while every living being in the hall trembled. These were not soldiers in the conventional sense, at least not in any way the Empire understood. They moved without the burden of fear, without the stiffness of caution, without even the slightest concern for the towering gods bristling with weapons. The air around them shimmered faintly, not with heat, not with electricity, but with possibility. A soft distortion, like the universe holding its breath. Cyril took a single step forward, towering over the humans like a monolith. His mantle shifted behind him in jagged waves, reflecting his rising irritation. His four eyes locked onto the trio, trying to dissect them, to understand their insolence. The first human, the one with the weapon, lifted the massive rifle into a resting position against his shoulder. It was a monstrous device, yet somehow elegant, humming with power held tightly in check. The weapon's barrel was segmented by floating rings that rotated independently, their motion following no mechanical rhythm. Occasionally, lines of impossible geometry flickered along its length. The second human moved like a liquid shadow. Their suit, if it could even be called, that was composed of strands that rearranged themselves with every breath, adapting their shape in an unending flow. At times, the metal formed plates. At others, it formed ripples or scales. It seemed alive, responding to threats before they even reached awareness. But the third human, the unarmored one, drew Cyril's attention most. He wore a simple jacket, fabric, ordinary. He carried no visible weapons, no armor, no shield generator. His hands were clasped behind his back with the casualness of someone touring the museum. This was the leader. Cyril knew it instinctively. He hated that. The Emperor straightened to his full height, shadows lengthening behind him like the wings of a primordial beast. His voice struck the hall with the weight of authority, vibrating the pillars. "You trespass upon the heart of my empire," he thundered. "Identify yourselves." The unarmored human spoke first, his tone quiet, yet carrying effortlessly through the vast chamber. "We did." Cyril stiffened imperceptibly. When we arrived, the human said, "Your sensors received our signal. You simply didn't understand it." Cyril's eyes narrowed. "You presume much." "We presume nothing," the human replied calmly. "We measure, we observe, then we act." Guards in the balconies above clutched their plasma lances tighter, though their wrists trembled. The Emperor stepped closer, looming like a living eclipse. "Why are you here?" The human met his gaze with unnerving ease. "To talk. You bring weapons to talk?" The human's lips tugged upward in a small, dry smile. "Only because your empire prefers shouting." A ripple moved across the hall. Fear, tension, outrage. Cyril let out a low growl, reverberating deep in his chest. "You destroyed one of my outposts." "We did," the human leader agreed. "And you dare admit it." "We don't lie, Emperor Exaral." The human tilted his head. "We simply don't need to." The Emperor's mantle flared reflexively, an ancient instinct triggered by challenge. "Tell me, little creature, what arrogance convinces you that 3 humans can walk into my hall without being reduced to vapor?" The human nodded toward the weapon carried by the first of the trio. This is why. The Emperor let out a derisive laugh. A gun? You bring a kinetic toy into the presence of a god? The human's eyes glinted with something unreadable. This isn't a gun. Oh, do enlighten me. The human stepped forward, placing a hand on the massive weapon. The rings around the barrel rotated faster. Space around it blurred slightly, as though the weapon were swallowing the very concept of distance. This, the human said softly. The words echoed through the hall like quiet thunder. A solution to what? Cyril demanded. To anything, the human replied. Cyril scoffed. You speak in riddles. No, the human said. We speak in engineering. He lifted the weapon, holding it loosely. Not in threat, merely in demonstration. This device does not fire projectiles. It does not emit plasma. It does not manipulate antimatter. Those are linear approaches, predictable, old. This weapon targets ideas. Cyril's eyes flickered. He had heard many absurd claims throughout his reign, but nothing like this. You expect me to believe that? The human shrugged. Belief isn't required. You'll understand in a moment. Before Xero could react, the human raised the weapon not at him, but toward the throne. His throne, forged from the heart of a neutron star. The densest matter the Empire had ever harvested. Stop! Xero roared. Fire upon him. The guards reacted instantly, plasma lances flaring as they opened fire. Blinding bursts of energy streaked through the hall, straight toward the humans. The distorted shimmer around the trio pulsed. Plasma bolts dissolved mid-flight. No explosions. No noise. They simply unraveled into dust, drifting harmlessly to the floor. The guards stared in horror, their weapons dimming as if ashamed. The human leader glanced back at them with faint sympathy. That's not personal, he said softly. Physics just disagrees with you now. Then he pulled the trigger. The weapon emitted no beam, no sound, no flash of light. Instead, reality fractured. The throne shuddered, then shivered, then vanished. Not destroyed, not exploded, not vaporized. It simply ceased to exist, unraveling into fine motes of starlight that faded into the air. Even the gravity well around it dissipated like a sigh. Cyril stumbled back, stunned. His mantle flared wildly as he regained balance. He stared at the empty space where his throne had stood unchallenged for millennia. How his voice cracked. What have you done? Nothing violent. The human replied gently. We didn't destroy your throne. We simply removed the idea of it. Cyril stared, mind reeling, pupils dilating in raw disbelief. That is not possible. It is, the human said. We asked the universe a question. We didn't like its answer. So we asked again, in a language it couldn't refuse. The Emperor's breathing grew heavy. For the first time in centuries, he felt small. He felt weak. You wield impossible power, he whispered. Power that defies the laws of existence. The human smiled softly, not arrogantly, but with an unsettling warmth. We stopped accepting those laws. Cyril's heart pounded in his chest. He had dismissed humans as primitives, inventors of crude machines cobbled from scrap and ambition. He had underestimated the one thing no empire could ever conquer: imagination unleashed by desperation, creativity tempered by survival, and the reckless hunger of a species that refused to stay in its lane. You changed the rules, Sorrel breathed. We didn't change them, the human corrected gently. We just started using the rest of them. The Emperor stumbled backward, overwhelmed. The humans stepped forward, slow, calm, deliberate. And the Emperor realized something that froze his blood. These creatures weren't here to brag. They weren't here to intimidate. They weren't even here to conquer. They were here because they had reached a place the Empire had never dreamed of. A place beyond power. A place where impossible was only the beginning. And they had come carrying solutions. The Imperial Hall, once an unshakable monument to Averon's supremacy, now felt like a fragile chamber of glass trembling in the presence of a storm it had never imagined. Emperor Cyril stood amid the afterimage of his vanished throne, its absence more monstrous than any explosion could have been. His mantle quivered, not from fear, he would never allow such a weakness to surface, but from the sudden void beneath him, the rupture of everything he believed unassailable. The humans walked forward, and each step carried a weight that unsettled reality itself. The shimmering distortion that clung to them pulsed, bending the air like a mirage. It was subtle, but unmistakable space reacting, acknowledging their presence as though they exerted an invisible authority over the laws that shaped it. With a trembling voice, one of the generals barked, "Form the defensive ring." Shields up. At once, half a dozen elite guards activated their personal barrier systems. Vortices of shimmering light enveloped them, forming shields calibrated to resist star-core blasts and gravitational shear. Cyril's elite warriors moved into formation, their armor glowing with the power of 1,000 enslaved suns. For the first time since the humans had entered, the Emperor allowed himself a small spark of satisfaction. This display of overwhelming force, precision, unity, would remind these creatures of their place. But the unarmored human only regarded the encircling guards with mild curiosity, as if evaluating a set of decorative sculptures. "You misunderstand," he said calmly. "We didn't come here to fight." "Lies," one of the generals snarled. "You attack our defenses, violate Imperial space, unmake the throne of the infinite Emperor, and now you claim peace?" The human shrugged lightly. "Peace doesn't mean passivity. It means purpose." Before Xuril could demand an explanation, the second human, the one in the shifting metallic suit, stepped forward. Their voice was smooth, cold, precise. "You're pointing weapons at us," they said. "Allow us to demonstrate why that's unwise." The guards instinctively tightened their formation. It didn't matter. The suited human raised their hand. The suit rippled, its threads unwinding from the body like strands of silver liquid. They slithered through the air in thin filaments, dozens, then hundreds, dancing like metallic nebulae. These living threads moved with impossible grace, weaving among the guards faster than any biological or mechanical reflex could track. The guards tried to react. Plasma lances fired. Shields flared. Some swung physical weapons through the air, desperate to intercept the incoming storm of metallic filaments. It was useless. The threads simply obeyed different rules. Every shield they touched collapsed, not shattered, collapsed. The energy matrices folded in on themselves like punctured bubbles, dissolving into glittering fragments. Armor cracked without force, as if suddenly unable to recall how to maintain its shape. Weapons melted into harmless drips of alloy. One thread brushed a guard's helmet. The helmet folded. Not crushed, folded like paper. The guard inside screamed, clutching their head, not in pain but in horror. The helmet had not harmed them. It had simply ceased to provide structure. The threads returned to their source, flowing back into the suit, which reformed seamlessly around the human's body. Silence strangled the hall. The guards, now disarmed and shaking, retreated instinctively. They had never witnessed a force that bypassed every traditional concept of offense and defense. Cyril felt a chill radiate across his skin. "What are you?" he whispered, more to himself than to them. The unarmored human answered instead. "We are people," he said simply, "just like you, Emperor. But the tools we carry, they're not weapons in your sense. They don't destroy. They correct." Cyril blinked, struggling to comprehend. "Correct?" The human nodded toward the now limp plasma weapons littering the floor. "A plasma lance fires because certain conditions allow it to. We simply remove those conditions." The Emperor felt the ground beneath him tilt. Not physically, but philosophically. "Then you can nullify anything," he said quietly. The human smiled, not with malice, but with a terrible serenity. "Not anything. Only what shouldn't exist." The first human, the one with the conceptual weapon, stepped forward, slinging the monstrous device across his shoulder with the easy confidence of a man carrying a tool, not an instrument of annihilation. "You're frightened," he said, addressing Cyril directly now. "That's normal. Anyone would be. But we didn't come here to dismantle your empire." "No," Cyril hissed. "You strip me of my throne, humiliate my warriors, bypass my planetary defenses, and then you claim this is diplomacy?" "This is restraint," the human said. A wave of dread slid through Cyril's chest. "Restraint from what?" The human's eyes softened. "From what we could have done instead." The words hit harder than any weapon. The Emperor's voice cracked with uncharacteristic fury. "You dare suggest your species possesses the power to topple an empire that has existed since before your sun ignited?" The human approached him slowly, hands still clasped behind his back. "Your empire is powerful, yes, but it's built on rules, assumptions, patterns of control. We stepped outside those. You speak nonsense." "Do I?" The human raised a brow. "Then answer me this. Why hasn't your planet fired a single orbital cannon since we arrived?" Cyril turned sharply to his officers. "Why?" The officers flinched. None dared answer. The human answered for them. "Because every command they send disassembles into meaningless data before reaching its target, not intercepted reinterpreted as noise." "You jammed them?" Cyril spat. "No," the human corrected softly. "We recontextualized them." Cyril felt his heart pound against his chest. "This is madness. You wield impossible technologies." The human shook his head gently. "No, you wield old technologies, old powers, old rules. We simply let go of them." The Emperor's breath shook a small, barely perceptible tremble. But the humans noticed. They noticed everything. "We came here to talk," the human said again. "But your empire only understands dominance. So we demonstrated what dominance looks like when paired with imagination." The hall trembled, not from any attack, but from the Emperor's rising rage. "You expect me to bend?" Cyril roared. "To kneel before primitives?" "No," the human said softly. "We expect you to learn." Cyril stepped forward with a scream of fury, his mantle flaring like wildfire, his 4 eyes blazing with imperial wrath. "I will never." The suit-wearing humans snapped their fingers. A soft click. Cyril froze. Not physically, though. Every muscle in his body locked. Not mentally, though. His thoughts flickered wildly like failing lights. It was deeper, more existential. He was frozen because his ability to move had been removed. Not disabled, not paralyzed. Removed, like a line of code commented out. He stood there, trembling, locked in place, his mind burning with panic and humiliation as he realized the horrifying truth. They had not attacked him. They had edited him. He could still breathe. He could still think, but the concept of movement had been severed from him. The suited human walked calmly to his side. "Relax," they said gently. "You'll get it back, once you stop trying to hurt us." Siral's eyes widened. He tried to scream. Nothing emerged. Even his voice had been cut off. The unarmored human approached him with quiet kindness. "We aren't here to conquer you," he said. "If we wanted to, we wouldn't need armies." He placed a hand on Ziral's immobilized shoulder. "We're here because you struck first. Because you threatened us. Because you didn't leave us a choice." His voice softened further. "We don't want a galaxy of subjects." He leaned close. "We want neighbors." Behind him, the two other humans stood silently, the distortions around them pulsing gently, like a heartbeat syncing with the chamber itself. The unarmored human stepped back, giving Ziral room. "You may move again." Instantly, Ziral's body unlocked. He stumbled forward, gasping as though emerging from deep water.
His mantle sagged, his breathing ragged.
His fury had not vanished, but it had been consumed by something far more primal. Awe, terror, humility. He raised trembling eyes toward the trio. "What are you?" he asked, the question escaping him before pride could suppress it. The human answered, without arrogance, without triumph, without cruelty. "We're you," he said softly. "A few thousand years from now." And the Emperor felt the weight of those words crash over him. Not as a threat, but as a future, one he had never imagined. The Emperor stood trembling, not from any physical injury, not from any weapon, but from the fracturing of a worldview he had believed inviolable. His 6 hearts pounded in discordant rhythm. His mantle flickered between imperial crimson and the pale gray of instinctive fear. Before him, the humans stood silent and calm, their presence reshaping the space around them like a gravitational anomaly. He had ruled 100 star systems through force and precision, through fear and inevitability. He had crushed rebellions with the ease of a man extinguishing a candle flame. He had never once doubted the primacy of Avaron destiny, nor the certainty of their ascendance. Empires expanded, lesser species bowed. That was the nature of existence, and he, the Emperor, Uxural, was its inevitable apex. Until today. Until them. He swallowed the dry taste of uncertainty, a sensation so foreign that he nearly gagged on it. "You claim to be us," he rasped. "An evolution of my people? That is absurd." The unarmored human smiled with a softness that Cyril found strangely disarming. "We didn't say we evolved from you. We said we are what you could become. And what we became, given time." Cyril hissed. "Your species is barely out of its orbital cradle. You have no ancestral link to the Avaron imperial line." "No," the human agreed, "but evolution isn't biological." "Not always." The second human, the one with the rippling metal suit, stepped beside him, hands clasped lightly. "We differ in form, in biology, in origin, but our journey was similar, our flaws identical. Our violent youth matched your own, step for step. You see yourself as eternal rulers. We once believed the same. The Emperor's eyes narrowed. Your species was ever so powerful. No, the third human answered, a woman whose shimmering presence seemed almost translucent. We gained our strength late. Unlike you, we nearly destroyed ourselves before we learned restraint. Her voice carried an inexplicable resonance, as though it was spoken in the chambers of the mind rather than the air. We feared each other so deeply. She whispered that we built weapons not to conquer the stars, but to ensure that none of us could touch them. Cyril hissed softly. Then how did you become this? We learned, she said simply. Learned what? He barked. How to stop splitting the universe into predator and prey, she replied. How to stop building power only to dominate. How to step beyond tools of destruction and into tools of understanding. Cyril's mantle quivered. Understanding is weakness. The woman smiled gently. Then why do you shake? The Emperor froze. His mantle stiffened in reflexive indignation, but he knew she was correct. His body trembled, not with rage, but with something far more destabilizing. Recognition. The recognition of a truth he had never permitted himself to imagine. Your power, he began slowly. It exceeds anything in our archives. It violates our laws of physics. It doesn't, the unarmored human said. It just follows laws you haven't discovered. Cyril flared with sudden anger. There are no laws beyond the universal matrix. Every scientific discipline concurs. The human gazed at him with an almost pitying calm. Your empire interprets the universe through dominance. You've only ever unlocked the laws that can be controlled. The laws that can be bent to weapons. But there are other laws, deeper ones, cooperative ones. The Emperor scoffed. Cooperation does not yield such power. No, the human replied softly, but curiosity does. Cyril's breath went shallow. He knew fear, but what he felt now was deeper. It was the slow, aching understanding that something fundamental in his empire, perhaps in himself, was broken. What do you want from me? His voice cracked, as though refusing to hold imperial authority any longer. The humans exchanged glances. We want nothing from you, the unarmored human said gently. We came because you deployed an imperial fleet to annihilate one of our outposts. You declared us an infestation. You ordered our extinction. Cyril felt a flush of heat creep across his mantle. You were expanding into our sacred territories. Sacred to whom? The suited human asked. Sacred because you say they are. Because your empire decided that space belongs only to itself. That is how survival works. Cyril spat. No, the third human murmured. That's how fear works. Silence fell again, deep and suffocating. The Emperor struggled to maintain the remnants of his poise. If you have means beyond war, if you claim to seek coexistence, why enter my chamber like conquerors? We entered your chamber, the unarmored human said, with exactly the force you required to stop attacking us. His gaze softened. You forced our hand, Emperor. We responded as gently as we could. Cyril stiffened. Gently? Yes. The suited human gestured, and for a moment, the smooth air of the throne chamber filled with shimmering images, echoes of what could have been. Cyril saw his planet from orbit, wreathed in a silent halo of distortion. Entire fleets drifting like gutted carcasses. Cities frozen in a stasis field. their inhabitants suspended like statues. His palace dissolved into dust by a wave of probability collapse. Then, just as quickly, the images vanished. Cyril gasped loudly. Not in horror, though. The horror was great, but in realization. "You didn't do that." "No," the human said. "We didn't. You're showing me what you could do." "No," the suited human said. "We're showing you what we chose not to do." Cyril's legs weakened beneath him. He sank onto the floor, unable to maintain the regal illusion of dominance. He had always known the universe was cruel. He had always believed that he was the pinnacle of its cruelty, its most refined weapon. But these humans, they were beyond cruelty, not because they lacked it, but because they had transcended it. He looked up at them, voice trembling. "Why?" The humans exchanged glances. "We told you," the woman said. "Because we want neighbors. You expect me to trust that?" Cyril demanded. "No," she answered honestly. "We expect you to understand the cost of not trusting it." Cyril lowered his gaze to the floor tiles carved from the bones of the first Avaron conquerors. Their shapes were sharp, angular, triangles upon triangles, interlocking symbols of expansion. He traced them with his eyes. They looked different now, smaller. "One condition," he said at last, raising his head. "If we are to coexist, if this empire is to change, if I am to restrain my fleets," he swallowed stiffly, unused to bargaining. "You will give me knowledge, a place in whatever future you've carved." The unarmored human considered him for a long, quiet moment. Then he smiled. "Willingness to learn," he said, "is the first sign of a species ready for the next step." Cyril's eyes widened. "You will share your technology." "No," the suited human said. "Not yet. You're not ready for it." Cyril bristled. "Then what?" "But," the woman interrupted gently, "we will share something far more valuable." She raised her hand. Not threateningly, not with power, but with invitation. Perspective. A soft glow enveloped Cyril, not painful, not invasive, but illuminating. He gasped as 1,000 images flickered across his mind. Not visions of destruction this time, not threats, not demonstrations of dominance, but possibilities. A galaxy shaped by cooperation, not force. Worlds uplifted, not conquered. Species thriving, not enslaved. Empire still powerful, but wise enough to use strength as protection. When the light faded, Cyril fell to his knees, shaking, not because he had been defeated, but because he had been rewritten not by force, but by understanding. "You ask much of me," he whispered hoarsely. "No," the human said. "We ask only what you once asked of others." The Emperor looked up slowly. "What is that?" The human extended a hand. "Respect." Cyril hesitated. Then, with a shuddering breath, he reached forward and placed his clawed hand into the human's. A gesture no emperor had ever made to an alien in all of Avaron history. "We will discuss terms," Cyril said softly. "Good," the human replied. And for the first time, the emperor noticed something in their eyes, something he had mistaken for calm or arrogance or unshakable superiority. It was none of those. It was hope. When the humans departed the Imperial Hall, they left no scorch marks, no rubble, no scars of battle. Only a silence filled with the weight of the future. As they vanished into a ripple of distortion, Emperor Cyril stood alone in his chamber, the place where he had once ruled with absolute authority. Now it felt like a chrysalis. He touched his mantle, steadying himself. "I will learn," he whispered. Across the galaxy, as their ship slipped into folds of space that the Empire's greatest scientists could not begin to detect, the unarmored human spoke quietly to his companions. "He'll make the right choice." "He will," the woman replied. "If he doesn't, we'll help him again." The suited human chuckled. "Gently, I hope. Always gently," she said. Stars reflected in the viewport stars that once feared the Empire and now awaited its evolution. "Another crisis defused," the suited human murmured. "No," the unarmored human replied gently. "Another neighbor found."